The email that destroyed my world was only 3 sentences long. But those 27 words from my own daughter cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever endured. I've decided to keep the wedding small and intimate. I don't want you there. You can watch on Zoom if you want. My name is Dorothy Williams, but everyone calls me Da. I'm 62 years old, and I spent the last 18 years sacrificing everything to raise my daughter Brianna after her father died in a construction accident. I worked double shifts in the Cleveland school cafeterias, cleaned houses on weekends, and went without so she could have dance lessons, college tuition, and every opportunity one never had. Now she was getting married to James, a wealthy man from Phoenix whose family had money, status, and everything I dreamed my baby girl would find. I was so proud. I was so happy for her. Until I discovered that to become worthy of their acceptance, she had to erase me completely. What I found out next about my daughter's lies and the life she'd built on the foundation of denying my existence would have broken most mothers forever. But I'm not most mothers. 2 days after that email, I showed up at her wedding. Uninvited, unwanted, but carrying a lifetime of truth that was about to destroy every lie she'd told to build her perfect new life. What happened when I walked through those church doors with photo albums, legal documents, and witnesses who remembered the real Brianna? Well, let's just say that 400 wedding guests got a very different ceremony than they expected. Before I tell you how I turned my daughter's dream wedding into a public reckoning that left her groom questioning everything he thought he knew about the woman he was marrying, and how I made sure every single person in that room understood exactly what kind of daughter abandons her dying mother for social status, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit that like button if you've ever sacrificed everything for someone who eventually treated you like you were nothing. Because trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand why being uninvited to my own daughter's wedding became the push I needed to remind her exactly who raised her. But to understand how devastating my revenge was, you need to know how deep a mother's love can go, and how much it hurts when that love gets thrown away like trash. It all started in Cleveland, Ohio, where I thought I was raising a grateful daughter. To understand how my daughter could look me in the eye and tell me I wasn't worthy of her wedding, you need to know what our life looked like before money and status turned her heart cold. Picture this. A small 2-bedroom apartment on Cleveland's east side, where a mother and daughter built a world that felt rich even when our bank account said otherwise. When Brianna's father died in that construction accident, she was only 10 years old. The life insurance was barely enough to cover the funeral, and suddenly I was a single mother with a 4th-grade education trying to figure out how to raise a brilliant little girl who deserved everything the world had to offer. I took a job in the Cleveland City Schools cafeteria because it meant steady work with benefits and the same schedule as Brianna's school day. $22 an hour serving lunch to kids who sometimes reminded me of my own daughter. Hungry for more than just food. Hungry for opportunities their families couldn't provide. But I was determined that Brianna would never go hungry for anything. Every evening after school, she'd do her homework at one of those cafeteria tables while I finished cleaning the kitchen. I'd help her with math problems between mopping floors, and we'd practice her spelling words while I scrubbed down the serving line. Those hours together became our sacred time. "Mama, why do you work so hard?" she asked me one evening when she was 12, watching me ice my swollen feet after a particularly long day. "Because you're going to college, baby girl," I told her. "And college costs money we don't have yet, so Mama's got to make it happen." She hugged me so tight that night. "I love you, Mama. I'm going to make you proud." Weekends meant cleaning houses in the wealthy suburbs. Shaker Heights, Bay Village, places where people lived in homes bigger than our entire apartment building. I'd bring Brianna with me sometimes, and she'd sit quietly doing homework while I scrubbed bathrooms and vacuumed carpets. "This is temporary," I'd tell her as we drove through those neighborhoods. Someday you'll live somewhere beautiful like this because you'll have the education to earn it. Those house cleaning jobs funded her dance lessons, her school trips, her graduation dress. When she got accepted to Ohio State University, I took out loans and worked extra shifts to cover what the partial scholarship didn't. She was going to be the first person in our family to graduate from college. And she was perfect. Honor roll every semester, dean's list, internships with marketing companies in Columbus. She'd call me every Sunday, excited about her classes, her friends, her bright future. "Mama, I met this boy," she told me during her senior year. "His name is James, and he's from Phoenix. His family owns some kind of real estate business. Is he good to you, baby?" "He's wonderful. And Mama, he wants to meet you when I graduate." Graduation day was the proudest moment of my life. Watching my daughter walk across that stage in her cap and gown, knowing every sacrifice had been worth it. James seemed nice enough. Polite, well-dressed, clearly from money but not snobbish about it. "Mrs. Williams, Brianna talks about you all the time," he said, shaking my hand. "She says you're her hero." After graduation, they moved to Phoenix together. The calls became less frequent. Once a week, then every other week. She was busy with her new job, her new life, her new world. "How's James treating you?" I'd ask during our shortened conversations. "Great, Mama. His family's really nice. They're sophisticated, you know? Different from what I'm used to." Different. That word should have been a warning sign. When she called to tell me about the engagement, I cried happy tears. "I want you to be my maid of honor, Mama. Will you do that for me?" "Of course, baby girl. I wouldn't miss your wedding day for anything in the world." I started saving immediately. New dress, plane ticket to Phoenix, maybe even a hotel room so I could stay a few extra days and really get to know James's family. This was going to be the most important day of both our lives. For 8 months, I planned and saved and dreamed about watching my daughter marry the man she loved. I had no idea that during those same 8 months, she was carefully erasing every trace of the woman who had made that wedding possible. If this sounds familiar, you're not alone. Because what I'm about to tell you is how shame works when someone you love starts seeing your sacrifice as their embarrassment. The changes in Brianna were so gradual I almost missed them. Looking back, I can see the pattern clear as day. My daughter was slowly rewriting the story of her life, and I was the chapter she wanted to delete. It started with small corrections during our phone calls. When I'd tell her about something funny that happened at work, she'd quickly change the subject. "Mama, you don't need to tell James about the cafeteria stories. He might not understand." Understand what? That I worked for a living. That I was proud of feeding children and making sure they had hot meals. When I asked about visiting Phoenix, there was always an excuse. "It's not a good time, Mama. James's family is really busy with business stuff. Maybe later." Later never came. The phone calls got shorter. Instead of our Sunday evening chats that used to last an hour, I was lucky to get 15 minutes of small talk before she'd say she had to go. "How's the wedding planning coming?" I'd ask excitedly. "Fine. But we're keeping it simple." Simple. But every time I tried to help, offering to make my famous pound cake for the reception, suggesting I could help with invitations, she'd brush me off. "We've got it handled, Mama. Don't worry about it." The worst part was how she started talking differently. Her Cleveland accent, the one we shared, the one that marked us as working-class Ohio, began disappearing. She started using words like summer as a verb and winter as a location. "We're summering at James's parents' place in Scottsdale," she'd say, like she'd been born into money instead of saving every penny for her school clothes. When I'd slip and use phrases from home, "fixing to go to the store" or "y'all come visit," She'd get quiet on the other end of the line. "Mama, maybe you should work on your grammar. James's family is. They're educated people." Educated people. As if the woman who raised her, who made sure she got that education, somehow didn't count. The breaking point should have been when she stopped mentioning me to James's family altogether. During one call, I could hear voices in the background asking about her family. "Oh, I don't really have much family," I heard her say. "My parents died when I was young. I was mostly raised by family friends." Family friends. 22 years of midnight fevers, school pickups, homework help, and scraped knees, and I'd been demoted to a family friend. When I confronted her about it, she laughed it off. "Mama, you're being dramatic. I just don't want to get into my whole life story with everyone I meet." But the evidence kept piling up. Social media posts about her self-made success, her independent journey, her gratitude for the people who believed in me. Always vague, never specific, never mentioning the woman who worked 2 jobs to make it all possible. The financial red flags started around the same time. Credit card companies calling my house looking for Brianna Williams. Collection notices being forwarded to my address because she'd used it as her permanent residence on applications. "Just ignore those, Mama," she said when I asked about them. "It's just confusion from when I moved. I'll handle it." But they kept coming. And some of them had charges I recognized. Expensive restaurants in Phoenix, designer clothing stores, charges that totaled more than I made in 3 months. "Brianna, honey, these bills have your name but my address. What's going on?" "It's complicated, Mama. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." Like I hadn't been worrying about her every day since she was born. The distance between us grew until our relationship felt like a business transaction. She'd call when she needed something forwarded, when she needed me to sign papers for her student loan consolidation, when she needed me to pretend I didn't exist in front of the people who mattered to her now. If this sounds familiar to you, if you've ever loved someone so much that you didn't notice when they started being ashamed of you, then you know the kind of slow heartbreak I was living through. But I kept telling myself it was just a phase. New city, new life, new pressures. She'd remember who raised her. She'd remember where she came from. I was about to learn just how wrong I was. The email that shattered my world arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 14 days before my daughter's wedding. I remember the date because it was the day I learned that the child I'd sacrificed everything for had been planning my emotional execution with surgical precision. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my morning coffee, looking at the airplane ticket confirmation I'd printed out the night before. Phoenix, Arizona. March 28th departure. I'd been so excited about finally meeting James's family, about seeing my baby girl marry the man she loved. Then I opened my laptop and saw the email. Subject line: "Wedding update, important." My heart started racing with excitement. Maybe she was finally going to tell me about the dress, or ask for advice about the flowers. Maybe she wanted me to arrive early to help with last-minute preparations. Instead, I read the 3 sentences that would haunt me for weeks. "Hi, Mom. I've decided to keep the wedding small and intimate. I don't want you there. You can watch on Zoom if you want. This is what's best for everyone. Love, Brianna." I stared at that screen for 10 minutes, rereading those words, waiting for them to make sense. My daughter. The girl I'd raised alone, the girl I'd worked myself to exhaustion for, had just uninvited me from the most important day of her life. Via email. Like I was a vendor she was canceling. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial her number. It went straight to voicemail. "Brianna, baby, I just got your email. There must be some mistake. Call me back. Please." She didn't call back that day. Or the next day. Or the day after that. With trembling fingers, I called Brianna again. This time she answered. What? Her voice was cold, distant. You wouldn't fit in, Mama. You don't understand how these people live, how they talk, what they expect. I'm trying to build a life here. A life that doesn't include me. A life that doesn't include the past. The past. That's what I was to her now. Not her mother. Not the woman who'd sacrificed everything for her success. The past. So the wedding is still happening. With 400 guests. But somehow there's no room for your mother. Silence. Then quietly. How did you know about the guest count? Because I'd done what any concerned mother would do. I'd called the venue to ask about accessibility for my arthritis, to make sure I could navigate their space. The wedding coordinator had been chatty about their beautiful 400-guest ceremony. You lied about everything. The intimate wedding. The small guest list. All of it. Mama, please. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be. Brianna, you invited 400 people to your wedding. Everyone except the woman who made that wedding possible. I'm sorry. I really am. But this is my choice. Yes, it is. And now I'm going to make mine. I hung up on my own daughter for the first time in her life. But I wasn't done making choices. That afternoon I did something I'd never done before. I started investigating my own daughter's life. What I found was going to change everything. Because if Brianna thought she could erase me from her story, she was about to learn that mothers don't disappear just because you're ashamed of them. Sometimes they show up when you least expect them. With receipts. That night I made a decision that would change everything. Not for Brianna. She had no idea what was coming. But for me. Because sometimes when your own child treats you like a dirty secret, the only choice is to remind them exactly who they're trying to hide. The first week after that phone call was the darkest of my life. I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by photo albums and memories of raising Brianna, trying to understand how the sweet little girl who used to braid my hair had turned into someone who could look me in the eye and call me the past. But the devastation turned into something else when I started going through my papers. Credit card bills. Lots of them. All with Brianna's name, but my address, my phone number as the contact, and charges that made my blood run cold. $3,000 at Nordstrom in Phoenix. $1,800 at some fancy restaurant. $5,000 at a bridal salon. All charged to cards I'd never seen before, but somehow connected to my identity. That's when I called my credit monitoring service. Mrs. Williams, we show 17 open credit accounts in your name. Would you like me to read through the recent activity? 17 accounts. I had 2 credit cards, both nearly paid off. There must be some mistake. Let me pull up the applications. The most recent one was opened 3 months ago for a Visa card with a $10,000 limit. The application shows your social security number, but it lists a Phoenix address. Brianna's address. My daughter hadn't just uninvited me from her wedding. She'd been stealing my identity to pay for it. The next discovery was worse. Call from a real estate agent in Cleveland. Mrs. Williams, I just wanted to confirm that you're still planning to close on the house sale next Friday. The buyers are very excited. What house sale? Your house. 847 Woodland Avenue. The deed transfer you signed last month. I almost dropped the phone. Someone had forged my signature and put my house. The house I'd lived in for 18 years, the house I'd almost paid off up for sale. It took 3 days of phone calls, document requests, and near panic attacks to figure out what had happened. Brianna had used my personal information to refinance the house, take out additional loans against it, and finally forge sale documents. She'd stolen my home to pay for a wedding I wasn't invited to. But the detail that broke me came from my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who'd seen the for sale sign go up. "I asked that real estate agent about you moving," she said. "She told me your daughter said you'd passed away and she was handling the estate. Dead again. This time to steal my house." The medical news came the same week I discovered the theft. My doctor had been calling for 2 weeks about my biopsy results, but I'd been too heartbroken to return the calls. "Mrs. Williams, I need you to come in. We found some abnormalities that we need to discuss. Stage 2 breast cancer. Treatable, but I'd need surgery and chemotherapy. I'd be fighting for my life while my daughter was stealing everything I'd worked for." I sat in that doctor's office, listening to treatment options and survival statistics, and realized that my own daughter didn't even know I was sick, because she'd made it clear she didn't want to know anything about my life. That night I made phone calls I should have made years ago. To Brianna's elementary school teachers. To our old church family. To neighbors who'd watched her grow up. Story after story. The time I worked 3 double shifts to pay for her school trip to Washington, D.C. The Christmas I cleaned houses for 6 weeks straight to buy her the bike she wanted. The countless evenings I helped her with homework at the kitchen table. I started gathering evidence. Not just of the theft, though I had plenty of that. Evidence of the life we'd really lived. The sacrifices. The love. The truth she was trying to erase. If Brianna wanted to pretend I was dead, I was going to show up at her wedding like the ghost of Christmas past. With photo albums, legal documents, and enough witnesses to prove that some mothers don't stay buried. Especially when their daughters are spending their funeral money on designer wedding dresses. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had someone try to erase you from their success story. Because sometimes the people who claim you're dead are the ones who need to be reminded what life really looks like. 2 weeks until the wedding. 2 weeks to plan the most important appearance of my life. While Brianna was putting the finishing touches on her fairy tale wedding, I was quietly building a case that would turn her perfect day into a reckoning she'd never forget. And the beautiful part. She had no idea her dead mother was very much alive and planning to crash her party. The next 10 days were the most focused I'd ever been in my life. I had cancer growing in my body, my house was being stolen from under me, and my credit was destroyed. But I also had something Brianna had forgotten about. I had the receipts. First, I contacted every person who'd been part of Brianna's real childhood. Mrs. Henderson, her 3rd grade teacher who still remembered how I'd volunteer in the classroom despite working 2 jobs. Dorothy, of course I remember Brianna. You were the most dedicated mother I ever worked with. Is everything okay? Would you be willing to take a trip to Phoenix with me? I need witnesses to something important. Mrs. Henderson didn't ask questions. Neither did Pastor Williams from our old church, or Mrs. Patterson from next door, or Mr. Garcia who'd tutored Brianna in math when I couldn't afford professional help. These people remembered the truth. They remembered the little girl who'd worn second-hand clothes but never missed a school event because her mama found a way. They remembered the teenager who'd worked at the church food bank because I taught her that helping others was more important than being embarrassed about needing help ourselves. Next, I gathered the physical evidence. Every photo album from Brianna's childhood. Report cards where teachers praised her but also noted my involvement. Church programs where both our names appeared together. Birthday party pictures from our apartment where we'd made magic with dollar store decorations and homemade cake. But the most damaging evidence was the financial records. I'd kept every receipt, every bank statement, every loan document from Brianna's college years. The student loan applications where I'd co-signed for $40,000. The receipts from Target where I'd bought her dorm room supplies. The payment records showing how I'd sent her $200 every month even when I couldn't afford it. I also had the recent evidence of her theft. Credit reports showing the fraudulent accounts. The the forged house sale documents, bank statements proving the money trail from my stolen equity straight to wedding vendors in Phoenix. The airline tickets were expensive, especially buying 6 at the last minute. But I'd found a way. Mrs. Henderson insisted on paying her own way. Pastor Williams said the church would cover his expenses. Mrs. Patterson used her late husband's life insurance money. "This is important, Dorothy," she said. "That girl needs to remember where she came from." I contacted the wedding venue directly, pretending to be a family friend who needed to update the guest list. "Oh yes, the Williams-Johnson wedding," the coordinator said cheerfully. "Beautiful event. 400 guests at the chapel. Reception in the grand ballroom. They've spared no expense." No expense indeed. Using my stolen money. "I need to add 6 guests to the list," I said. "Family members who are flying in from Ohio." "Of course. Just give me the names." Dorothy Williams and guests. We were officially on the list. The hardest part was staying silent when Brianna called 2 days before the wedding. "Mama, I wanted to make sure you were okay. I know this has been hard." "I'm fine, baby girl. Watching your wedding on Zoom just like you wanted." "Good. That's probably better for everyone." Probably so. What she didn't know was that I'd already booked the hotel rooms, already coordinated with my witnesses, already packed the evidence that would expose every lie she'd built her new life on. The morning of the wedding, I put on my best dress, the navy blue one I'd bought for her college graduation, and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like exactly what I was, a mother who'd sacrificed everything for her child. Today, that child was going to remember what that sacrifice looked like. You won't believe what happens next. Make sure you're subscribed because this confrontation is going to be legendary. 400 guests were expecting a wedding. They were about to get an education. The first crack in Brianna's perfect wedding facade happened when the venue coordinator called her 2 hours before the ceremony. I wasn't there to see her reaction, but I can imagine the panic when she heard those 5 words that shattered her confidence. "Your mother's party has arrived." According to Mrs. Henderson, who'd checked us into the hotel that morning, Brianna had called the venue in a frenzy. "There must be some mistake. My mother is deceased. She cannot possibly be there. Ma'am, I have Dorothy Williams plus 5 guests on the list. They're here for your wedding. Should I send them to the bridal suite?" The silence that followed must have been deafening. "No," Brianna finally said. "There's been some confusion. Don't let them into the chapel. I'll handle this." But she couldn't handle it. Because 30 minutes before her wedding was supposed to start, I was standing in the lobby of the Phoenix Country Club with 5 people who'd known her since she was a child, holding a manila folder full of truths she'd spent 2 years trying to bury. "Mrs. Dorothy." The venue coordinator approached us with a confused smile. "The bride seems to think there's been some mistake. She said you weren't supposed to be here." "Oh, there's no mistake," I said calmly. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." James's mother appeared in the lobby like a woman who'd seen a ghost, which in her mind she had. You can't be." She stammered, staring at me like I'd risen from the dead. "Dorothy Williams," I said, extending my hand. "Brianna's very much alive mother. I believe you called to offer your condolences for my recent passing." The color drained from her face. But Brianna said, "She told us you died last year. From cancer." "Well," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, "the reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated, though the cancer part is true. I was just diagnosed last week." James's mother looked like she might faint. Behind her, other family members were gathering, drawn by the commotion. I could see James himself approaching, handsome in his tuxedo, confusion written all over his face. "James," his mother whispered urgently, "this is Brianna's mother. Her real mother. Who is not dead." Poor James. You could watch the realization hit him in real time. His fiancée had lied about one of the most basic facts of her life. "Mrs. Williams," he said carefully, "I'm so sorry. There seems to have been some miscommunication." "Oh, there's been a lot of miscommunication," I replied. "But I'm here to clear things up." That's when Brianna appeared. She looked stunning in her wedding dress. A $5,000 designer gown that I now knew was purchased with credit cards opened in my name. Her makeup was flawless, her hair perfect, but her eyes were filled with panic. "Mama," she said quietly, "what are you doing here?" "I'm attending my daughter's wedding. The one I supposedly wasn't invited to because it was small and intimate." I gestured around the lavishly decorated venue, where 400 guests were being seated for a ceremony that had cost more than I'd made in 3 years. "Brianna," James said slowly, "why did you tell my family your mother was dead?" "It's complicated," she said, the same phrase she'd used to dismiss my concerns for months. "No," I said firmly. "It's not complicated at all. Simple. Your fiancée was ashamed of her background, so she erased it." She erased me. James's family was gathering now, all of them staring at the bride who'd built her entire relationship on a fundamental lie. "But the good news," I continued, "is that I brought photo albums, and friends who remember the real story, and some very interesting financial documents that I think everyone should see." Brianna's face went white. "Mama, please. Don't do this." "Don't do what, baby girl?" "Don't tell the truth. Don't show these nice people who you really are and where you really came from." The wedding coordinator appeared, looking frazzled. "I'm sorry, but we have 400 guests seated and waiting. Do we need to delay the ceremony?" I looked at my daughter, beautiful and terrified in her stolen dress, surrounded by people who didn't know the first true thing about her. "Oh no," I said. "We're not delaying anything. These folks came to see a wedding, and they're going to get exactly what they came for. Just maybe not the wedding they expected." By now, panic was spreading through the wedding party like wildfire. People who thought they knew Brianna's story were beginning to ask the right questions. And I was ready to give them answers that would shake that country club to its foundation. The next 30 minutes were pure chaos, barely contained by Southern politeness and wedding day protocols. James's family huddled in urgent whispered conferences, while Brianna tried desperately to control the narrative that was slipping through her manicured fingers. "There's been a misunderstanding," she announced to the growing crowd of confused relatives. "My mother. She's been sick. She gets confused sometimes." Confused. She was telling them I had dementia. "Actually," Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her teacher's voice carrying that authority that made rooms go quiet. "Dorothy is sharp as a tack. Always has been. I should know. I taught Brianna in 3rd grade, and Dorothy volunteered in my classroom every week despite working 2 jobs." James's father, who'd been silent until now, looked between his son and his son's bride. "So you do have a living mother, who you told us was deceased. Why would you lie about something like that?" "It's not a lie," Brianna said desperately. "It's complicated family issues. Mama and I haven't been close. Close enough for her to steal my identity," I said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. The lobby went dead silent. "What did you say?" James asked. I opened my manila folder and pulled out the credit reports. "Your bride has been opening credit cards in my name. 17 of them to be exact. To pay for this wedding." "That's not true," Brianna said, but her voice was shaking. It's all true, Pastor Williams said, stepping beside me. I've known this family for 15 years. Dorothy raised that girl alone after her father died. Worked herself to the bone to put Brianna through college. She's lying. Brianna's voice cracked. They're all lying. They're just upset that I've moved on with my life. But James was looking at the credit reports now. His face growing darker with each line item. Nordstrom, $3,000. Bridal salon, $5,000. These are all Phoenix charges, Brianna. All on cards in your mother's name. James, I can explain. And this, I continued, pulling out more documents, is the forged signature on the sale of my house. The house your bride sold without my knowledge to pay for your reception. James's mother gasped. You sold your mother's house. She told the real estate agent I was dead, I said. Said she was handling my estate. The wedding coordinator appeared again, more frazzled than before. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have 400 guests asking when the ceremony will begin. The minister is waiting at the altar. Tell them 5 more minutes, James said grimly. His whole family was staring at Brianna now like they'd never seen her before. There's more, I said, because there was. Mrs. Patterson, would you like to tell them about the conversation you had with the real estate agent? My elderly neighbor stepped forward with the dignity of someone who'd lived through the Depression and wasn't intimidated by fancy country clubs. That agent told me Brianna said her mother died of alcoholism. Said Dorothy was an embarrassment to the family who abandoned her as a child. Brianna was crying now, her perfect makeup running in black streaks down her cheeks. That's not. I never said. Mama, please. You're ruining everything. I'm not ruining anything, baby girl. I'm revealing everything. James was standing completely still, the credit reports in his hands, looking at the woman he was supposed to marry in 10 minutes. How much of our relationship has been built on lies? He asked quietly. James, please. Love you. That's not a lie. But everything else is. The wedding coordinator was back, looking desperate. The minister says we need to start now or we'll lose our time slot for photos. I looked around at the faces staring at us. Some shocked, some embarrassed, some angry. Well, I said, we wouldn't want to keep 400 people waiting. Let's go to this wedding. Because the show was just getting started. The walk into that chapel was the longest and most satisfying walk of my life. 400 guests rose to their feet as the wedding march began, expecting to see a radiant bride. Instead, they saw a procession of truth that was about to destroy every lie my daughter had built her new life on. Brianna walked down that aisle like a woman heading to her execution. James waited at the altar, his face a mask of confusion and growing anger. Behind me, Mrs. Henderson, Pastor Williams, and the rest of my witnesses took their seats in the front row. The seats originally reserved for James's extended family. Dearly beloved, the minister began, his voice echoing through the chapel. We are gathered here today to witness the union of James and Brianna in holy matrimony. I could see James's hands shaking as he looked at his bride. Behind him, his groomsmen were whispering among themselves, clearly sensing something was very wrong. Marriage is built on trust, honesty, and the joining of 2 families, the minister continued. Trust and honesty. The irony was lost on no one. If anyone has reason why these 2 should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional pause, usually filled with nervous laughter and knowing glances. This time I stood up. I object. 400 heads turned in unison. The gasp that went through the crowd was audible. On what grounds? The minister asked, clearly flustered. on the grounds that this marriage is based on fraud. I walked to the front of the chapel, my witnesses following behind me. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dorothy Williams. I'm the mother of the bride. The mother who, according to your wedding programs and everything you've been told, died last year. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. But as you can see, I'm very much alive. What I am dying from is cancer. Cancer that my daughter doesn't know about because she spent the last 2 years pretending I don't exist. Mama, please, Brianna whispered, but her voice was lost in the shocked silence. You see, Brianna was so ashamed of her background, of the mother who raised her in a small apartment in Cleveland, who worked in a school cafeteria to pay for her education, that she decided it would be easier to kill me off than to admit where she came from. I pulled out the photo albums. These are pictures of the real Brianna, the little girl who lived in subsidized housing, who wore second-hand clothes to school, whose mother cleaned houses on weekends to pay for her dance lessons. I opened the first album and held up a photo of 8-year-old Brianna at her birthday party in our tiny apartment. This is the daughter who used to braid my hair and tell me I was her hero. The daughter who promised she'd take care of me when I got old. Instead, she stole my identity, opened 17 credit cards in my name, and sold my house without my knowledge to pay for this wedding. The crowd erupted. James stepped back from Brianna like she was contagious. She told you I was an alcoholic who abandoned her. The truth is, I worked 3 jobs to put her through college and never missed a single school event. Pastor Williams stood up. I baptized that girl when she was 12. I watched Dorothy sacrifice everything for Brianna's future. And I'm here to tell you that Dorothy Williams is one of the finest women I've ever known. Mrs. Henderson added her voice. Brianna was in my 3rd grade class. Dorothy volunteered every week, helped with field trips, made sure Brianna never felt different because they didn't have much money. Brianna was sobbing now, her designer dress shaking with each breath. Mama, stop, please. You're destroying my life. No, baby girl. You destroyed your own life the minute you decided I wasn't good enough to be part of it. I turned to address the crowd directly. You came here to witness a marriage. Instead, you're witnessing the consequences of a daughter who forgot that shame about your family is really shame about yourself. James pulled off his wedding ring. I can't marry someone who's lied about everything, who's stolen from her own mother, who's so ashamed of where she came from that she'd rather commit fraud than tell the truth. James, please. Brianna reached for him, but he stepped away. You told me you were self-made, that you'd overcome poverty through your own determination. You never mentioned that your mother was the one who made your success possible. The minister cleared his throat awkwardly. I think, perhaps we should adjourn. Actually, I said, I think we should stay, because 400 people took time out of their lives to be here today. And they deserve to know the whole truth about the woman they came to celebrate. I pulled out the final document. This is Brianna's college transcript, paid for entirely by student loans that I co-signed. And this is the bank record showing that I sent her $200 every month during college, even when I had to choose between groceries and keeping the lights on. The chapel was so quiet you could hear hearts breaking. The saddest part, I concluded, is that I would have been proud to be here today. Proud to watch my daughter marry a good man. Proud to meet his family and share stories about the amazing woman I raised. Instead, she chose to erase me, to steal from me, to lie about me. I looked at Brianna one last time. But you can't erase the truth, baby girl. And you can't steal love and respect. Those have to be earned. As I walked back down that aisle, 400 guests watched the bride's fairy tale crumble into the reality she tried so hard to escape. In the silence that followed, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about exposing Brianna's lies. It was about proving to myself that I was never the embarrassment she claimed I was. Her inability to see my worth was her limitation, not my reality. The immediate aftermath was complete chaos. Half the guests were recording everything on their phones, turning my daughter's humiliation into instant social media infamy. The other half were either comforting James's devastated family or demanding answers about what they just witnessed. Brianna collapsed into the front pew. Her $5,000 dress spread around her like expensive wreckage. She was crying so hard she could barely breathe, but no one moved to comfort her. Not even James, who stood at the altar looking like a man who just discovered his entire life was built on quicksand. "I need some air," he announced to no one in particular, and walked out of the chapel. His groomsmen followed, leaving Brianna completely alone. James's mother approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Williams, I am so deeply sorry. We had no idea. The things she told us about you. They were horrible lies." "What exactly did she tell you?" "That you were an alcoholic who abandoned her as a child. That you were abusive and unstable. That she'd had to overcome terrible trauma from her childhood." Each word was a fresh knife to my heart. My daughter hadn't just erased me. She'd turned me into a monster to justify her shame. "The truth is," I said quietly, "I was never perfect. We were poor and I was tired a lot from working so much. But I loved that girl with every breath in my body." James's father, who'd been silent through most of the confrontation, finally spoke. "We understand now why she lied. She was embarrassed about her background. But stealing from you, selling your house, that's not embarrassment. That's criminal." Pastor Williams had stayed close to me throughout the chaos. "Dorothy, we should probably discuss next steps. The identity theft, the house sale. These are serious crimes." I looked at Brianna, still sobbing in that pew, and felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction but sadness. "I just want my house back," I said. "And my credit restored. I don't want to send my daughter to prison. Even after everything she's done to you. She's still my baby girl. She's just lost her way." The venue coordinator approached apologetically. "I'm so sorry, but we need to clear the chapel. We have another event this evening." 400 guests filed out in stunned silence. Some stopped to shake my hand or offer words of support. Others avoided eye contact, embarrassed to have witnessed such private pain made public. Mrs. Henderson gathered our group. "Dorothy, what do you want to do now?" I looked back at Brianna one more time. She was sitting alone in that chapel. Her fairy tale wedding dress now a costume for a play that had ended before the first act. "Now I go home. To Cleveland. To my real life." What about Brianna? Brianna has some decisions to make. She can keep living the lie she's built, or she can remember who raised her and where she came from. As we walked toward the exit, I heard footsteps behind us. "Mama!" Turned. Brianna was standing there, makeup ruined, dress wrinkled, looking more like the little girl I remembered than the stranger she'd become. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I know you are, baby girl. But sorry doesn't give me my house back. Sorry doesn't undo the lies you told about me. Sorry doesn't heal the cancer I'm fighting alone because you decided I was dead. I can fix this. I can make it right. Can you? Can you unsteal my identity? Can you unsell my house? Can you take back telling everyone I was an abusive alcoholic?" She had no answer for that. "The only thing you can fix," I said, "is yourself. You can decide whether you want to be the kind of person who throws away the people who love her, or the kind of person who remembers that where you come from is part of who you are." I kissed her forehead one last time. When you're ready to be my daughter again, my real daughter, not the fake version you created, you know where to find me. As we left that country club, I felt something I hadn't expected: peace. Share this with someone who needs to remember that you should never be ashamed of the people who sacrificed for your success. Success, I learned, isn't just about proving people wrong. It's about building a life so authentic that their lies become irrelevant background noise. 6 months after the wedding that became Phoenix's most talked about scandal, my life looked completely different. I was back in Cleveland, back in my house, which I'd managed to reclaim through legal channels, and fighting cancer with the support of a community that had rallied around me in ways I never expected. The identity theft case had been resolved without criminal charges, though it took months of paperwork to restore my credit. Brianna had signed everything back over to me and was working with a debt consolidation company to pay off the credit cards she'd opened in my name. James had called me once, about 2 months after the wedding. "Mrs. Williams, I wanted you to know that I don't blame you for what happened. You did what any mother would do." "How is she?" I'd ask, because despite everything I still loved my daughter. "Lost. Shame. She moved back to Cleveland, actually. Got a job at a marketing firm downtown. I think she's trying to figure out who she really is without all the lies." Brianna and I hadn't spoken since that day at the chapel, but I knew she was in the city. Mrs. Patterson had seen her at the grocery store a few times, looking thin and sad. "She asks about you," my neighbor had reported. "Wants to know how you're doing with the treatments." The chemotherapy was rough, but manageable. The church family had organized meal trains and rides to appointments. Former students from the cafeteria, now adults with families of their own, stopped by to check on me. The community I'd served for decades was serving me back. Mrs. Henderson visited every Tuesday. "You know, Dorothy, what you did at that wedding took more courage than most people have in their entire lives. I didn't have a choice. She was stealing from me. You had a choice about how to handle it. You could have just called the police. Instead, you gave her the chance to see herself clearly." The story had made national news. Mother crashes daughter's wedding to expose identity theft, and I'd received hundreds of letters from other parents who'd been abandoned or mistreated by their adult children. One letter particularly moved me, from a mother in Seattle whose daughter had also been ashamed of her working-class background. "Reading about your courage gave me the strength to stop apologizing for who I am," she'd written. "My daughter can accept me as I am or miss out on knowing a woman who worked 3 jobs to give her opportunities." But the most meaningful change was internal. I'd stopped hoping for Brianna's approval and started living for my own peace. I'd begun volunteering at a local domestic violence shelter, helping women who'd been erased or diminished by people who claimed to love them. "Recovery isn't just about healing from what they did to you," I'd tell the women in my support group. "It's about remembering who you were before they convinced you that you weren't enough." 8 months after the wedding, I was in my garden, the one I'd almost lost, when I heard a car door slam. I looked up to see Brianna walking toward me, carrying a small bouquet of flowers. She looked different, smaller somehow but also more real. Her hair was natural again, no expensive highlights. She wore jeans and a simple sweater instead of designer clothes. "Hi, Mama." "Hello, Brianna. I brought you flowers. For your garden." "That's nice." We stood there for a moment, 2 women who'd shared a lifetime but were essentially strangers to each other now. "I've been in therapy," she said finally, "learning about shame and self-worth and how I hurt people I love." "That's good. I want to make amends. Real amends. Not just saying sorry but actually changing." "What does that look like?" "It looks like me admitting that I spent 2 years hating myself for where I came from, And I made you pay for my self-hatred. I kept weeding, letting her talk. It looks like me telling my therapist that the strongest person I've ever known worked in a school cafeteria and raised a daughter who turned out to be everything you taught her not to be. And it looks like me asking if there's any way, someday, I might earn the right to be your daughter again. I looked at her, then really looked at her. Baby girl, you never stopped being my daughter. You just forgot how to be proud of it. For the first time in 2 years, I saw the little girl who used to help me in the garden. Can I help you plant these flowers? I'd like that. As we knelt in the dirt together, I realized that sometimes the most beautiful revenge isn't destroying someone who hurt you. Sometimes it's living so authentically that they remember what they lost when they tried to throw you away. Drop a comment if you've ever had to remind someone of your worth. Because the people who truly matter will never ask you to be ashamed of where you came from.